welcome to another bedtime story where we are reading our book 1984 by George Orwell, which was written in 1948, but it was set in the future 1984. However, we are reading this in the 2020s, so let's see if what George Orwell anticipated the future was going to be like really is. So in our story, we have our hero, who is Winston, and he lives in this futuristic world where the government control everything, and they talk about the party. So the party with a capital P, and there seems to be Big Brother everywhere with posters saying Big Brother is watching you, which we know to mean cameras, spies, all sorts of things. Even there are telescreens inside people's houses. So you really do not have any privacy in this futuristic world. They even have things like the thought police. So even thinking something against the government is considered a crime. So we are now going to begin chapter 4, which is entitled Own Life. If you are sitting comfortably, I shall begin. Winston sat at the table and opened his diary. He thought of his parents. He thought, about 10 or 11 years old when his mother disappeared. She was a tall, silent woman with lovely fair hair. He could not remember his father too well. He was dark and thin and always wore dark clothes. They had both been vaporized in the 1950s. His thoughts moved to other women, and he started writing in his diary. It was 3 years ago. It was on a dark evening in a narrow side street near one of the big railway stations. She had a young face with thick makeup. I liked the makeup, the whiteness and the bright red lips. No woman in the party wore makeup. There was nobody else in the street and no telescreens. She said $2 and It was too difficult to continue. Winston wanted to hit his head against the wall, to kick the table over and throw the diary out the window. Anything to stop the memory of that night. It was, of course, illegal to go with a woman under those circumstances. The punishment was 5 years in a work camp, but not death. The party knew it happened. Some prole women were selling themselves for a bottle of gin, and the party didn't worry too much about them. The party wanted to stop all type of pleasure, and the request would be to marry, but it was possible to refuse the request if you didn't want to. The idea of marriage was simply to make children, so you had more people in the future belonging to the party and believing in the party. He thought of Katherine, his wife. Winston had been married. He was probably still married. If his wife was dead, nobody had told him. They had lived together for about 15 months. 9, 10, maybe 11 years ago. Katherine was a tall, fair-haired girl who moved well. She had an interesting face until you found out that there was almost nothing behind it. She believed everything the party said. She only was with her husband because it was her duty to make children. When no children came, they agreed to separate. Every 2 or 3 years since then, Winston found a prole woman, and he agreed to go with her, and she agreed to go with him. But really, he wanted his own woman. He wanted his own relationship. He continued to write in his diary. When I saw her in the light, she was quite an old woman. She had no teeth at all, but I still went with her. There, he had written it. At last, finally, he had written it down in his diary. But somehow, writing it down didn't help. He still wanted to shout and scream. He had walked several kilometers. It was the second time in 3 weeks that he had missed an evening at the party members club. This was not a good idea. Your attendance at the club was carefully checked. A party member had no free time and was never alone. It was dangerous to do anything alone, even go for a walk. There was a word for it in Newspeak: own life. It was called own life, meaning separation from everybody else. He was walking in a prole area near a building that had in the past been an important railway station. The houses were small and dirty and reminded him of rat holes. There were hundreds of people in the street, pretty young girls, young men chasing the girls, fat old women. Many people were in the streets. Even dirty children with no shoes ran through the mud. The people looked at him strangely. The blue overalls of the party were an unusual sight in a street like this. It was unwise to be seen in such places unless you had a definite reason to be there. The thought police would stop you if they saw you. Suddenly, everybody was shouting and screaming and running back into their rat holes. A man in a black suit ran past Winston and pointed to the sky. "Bomb!" he shouted. "Up there! Bomb!" Winston threw himself to the ground. The proles were usually right when they warned you about a bomb falling. When he stood up, he was covered in bits of glass from the nearest window. He continued walking. The bomb had destroyed a group of houses 200 meters up the street in front of him. He saw a human hand cut off at the wrist. He kicked it to the side of the road and turned right, away from the crowd. He was in a narrow street with a few dark little shops among the houses. He seemed to know the place, of course. He was standing outside the shop where he had bought the diary. He was afraid suddenly. He had been mad to buy the diary, and he had promised himself he would never come near this place again. But he noticed that the shop was still open, although it was nearly 2100 hours. He would be safer inside than standing doing nothing outside, so he went into the shop. If anyone asked, he could say that he was trying to buy a razor blade. The owner had just lit a hanging oil lamp, which smelled unclean but friendly. He was a small, gentle-looking man of about 60, with a long nose and thick glasses. His hair was almost white, but the rest of his face looked surprisingly young. He looked like a writer or perhaps a musician. His voice was soft and he didn't speak like a prole. "I recognized you when you were outside," he said immediately. "You're the gentleman who bought the diary. There's a beautiful paper in that diary. No paper like that has been made for, I would say 50 years. He looked at Winston over the top of his glasses. Is there anything special that I can do for you, or did you just want to look around? I was passing, said Winston, and I just came in. I don't want to buy anything. Well, that's all right, said the shop owner, because I haven't got very much to sell you. He looked around the shop sadly. Don't tell anyone I said so, but it's difficult to get old things these days. And when you get them, nobody wants them. The old man's shop was full of things, but they were all cheap and dirty and useless. There's another room upstairs if you would like to look, he said. Winston followed the man upstairs. The room was a bedroom with furniture in it. There was a bed under the window, taking nearly a quarter of the room. We lived here for nearly 30 years until my wife died, said the old man sadly. I'm selling the furniture slowly. There's a beautiful bed, but perhaps it would be too big for you. Winston thought he could probably rent the room for a few dollars a week if he dared to. It would be so peaceful to live as the people used to live in the past, with no voice talking to you, nobody watching you. There's no telly screen, he said. Ah, said the old man. I never had one. Too expensive. There was a picture on the wall. It showed a London church that used to be famous in the days when churches were famous and people still went to them. Winston didn't buy the picture, but he stayed in the room talking to the old man, whose name, he discovered, was Charrington. Even when he left, he was still thinking about renting the room. But then, as he stepped into the street, his heart turned to ice. A woman in blue overalls was walking towards him, not 10 meters away. It was the girl with dark hair, the one in the Young People's League. The girl must be following him. Even if she was not in the thought police, she must be a spy. The thought police would come for him one night. They always came at night, and they always caught you. And before they killed you, you asked them on your knees to forgive you for your thought crime, and there would be a lot of pain. So, we have finished chapter 4 of our book, which is available online in Amazon and many online bookstores. What I like about this book is that it's by Pearson's, which means that it has been edited specifically for people who are learning English as a second language. And this book corresponds to the CEFR framework for people studying foreign languages, and it is coming in at level B2, which is intermediate level. Also, if you do have a copy of the book, at the very back there is a word list, which is really useful because you don't have to put the book down and then look up the word. So I really recommend, if you want to get into reading, please continue with the bedtime stories here on YouTube so you can listen to the pronunciation, because that's always very difficult in English, and you can buy a copy of the book from most online shops. Have a good evening, sweet dreams, good night.